Welcome everyone to this online seminar. Great that you are here already. We will give it another 2-3 minutes for more people to log in and then get started. But thanks for being here, and we are very excited to start this online seminar very shortly together with you. And whilst we wait, you can already see some or all of the faces that will be talking today. So we will be 5 people in total presenting or moderating today's webinar, which is entitled Natural Resource Management in the Context of Conflict-Affected Scenarios, Applying a Community-Based Perspective on the Concept of Environmental Peacebuilding. And as pre-information, whilst we have a few more minutes before we start, in case you're also interested in joining the webinar that is to follow, so the third webinar, you can just stay online. There is no need to log off and then log in again. We will just have a 10 minutes break between the 2 online seminars and then start with the next webinar using the same room that you've already entered with the current link.
We have 32 attendees already, whenever you want to go.
Okay, then I think this is the sign that we start. So once again, welcome to all of you who are joining today our second online seminar entitled Natural Resource Management in the Context of Conflict-Affected Scenarios, Applying a Community-Based Perspective on the Concept of Environmental Peacebuilding. My name is Katharina Löhr. I'm currently working at the Leibniz Center for Agricultural Landscape Research, and I'm also a lecturer at Humboldt-Universität zu Berlin. And together with my colleague Camilo Lozano, who's also working at ZALF, we will be facilitating this online seminar. As all of us are probably aware, natural resources have been linked to violent conflict and war for a very long time. However, in the past 20 to 30 years, the idea has also emerged that natural resources can also actually be an opportunity if they are used jointly by conflicting parties and can actually contribute to higher levels of cooperation and trust. From this notion, the field or the concept of environmental peacebuilding has emerged with an increasing interest in research and also practice. There is a tendency to research on interstate conflicts and also on water as a resource. However, there has also been now increasingly the idea to also look at interstate conflicts and also at the local perspective, and to look at mechanisms and means that actually foster the cooperation and the trust building for enhanced peace building. And it's from this notion that we have conceptualized today's online seminar. Before I present to you today's speakers, just a few technical issues. The seminar is split into 4 parts. We will first have all 3 presentations, one after the other, and then a joint question and answer session in the end. We kindly invite you to put your comments and questions throughout the seminar into the chat system that you find in your dashboard. And Camilo will do his very best to somehow structure them in a way that we can respond or take care of as many as possible in the question and answer session towards the end of the seminar. As I already pointed out, if you are interested in also joining the third seminar, you can just stay online later. We will take about a 10 minutes break and then resume using the same space that we are finding each other in at this time. Also, we will be recording, or we are already recording this seminar, so you can also have a look at the seminar again at a later stage or share with others. And with this, I would now introduce our speakers to you today, and I'm very honored and very happy to have 3 speakers with us today, and we will be starting with a presentation later by Luca Eufemia. Luca has just recently defended his PhD dissertation, which is entitled A Framework for Community-Based Governance in Grasslands and Savannas in South America at Humboldt University of Berlin. And Luca is also currently working at ZALF in 2 different working groups. The one is being the biotic interactions between forest and agricultural land, and the other on sustainable land use in developing countries. Luca in his research focuses on local and environmental governance, applied macroeconomics and institutional economics, political sciences and international relations, and has worked in various countries in Europe and South America. Luca, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much. Luca's talk will be followed by a presentation by Marta Venegas, who is currently working at Alliance Biodiversity CIAD in Colombia. And Marta holds a master's degree on forest and nature conservation from Wageningen University. And in her current work, she focuses on multifunctional landscapes and climate action research. Marta, thanks for presenting today and being here. Last, but of course not least, we will have a presentation by Hector Morales Munoz, who is also a researcher at ZALF and at the same time a PhD candidate at Humboldt-Universität zu Berlin. His research focuses on sustainable land use systems, food security, and peacebuilding indicators. And he's a political scientist with a master's degree from LSE in London. Hector has also multiple years of practical experience on governance, migration, and peacebuilding, working for different international organizations such as the German Agency for International Cooperation, GIZ, as well as Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. And with this, I would like to hand over my screen to Luca and to give Luca the word and comments with his presentation on the community-based governance. Luca, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. And all, please remember to put comments and questions into the dashboard and chat system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katharina. I hope you can see the screen at the moment. I will, yes, make full screen my presentation. So, and I start, hope you can hear me fine.
Yeah.
If we have any problems, just let me know. So I'm going to talk today about community-based governance of natural resources in post-conflict scenarios. And the idea is to give you like a quite broad idea about how community-based governance and natural resource management can sort of interface. Therefore, I will start by giving you like 2 conceptual ideas, one on governance, one on natural resource management, and then I will present some challenges, both positive and negative challenges of this sort of interface between the 2. So I will start, I think, yeah, all right. So, as you know, probably as you heard about governance, this concept is quite gaining some momentum and has also a broader meaning. It was started, or it has started, as a product of academic debate about the transformation of the state. Nevertheless, nowadays it sort of transcends collective systems, also nations, political economic regimes, but also the idea and the concept of good governing and how good governing somehow it is structured. Besides being an instrument for political development, governance is also increasingly an important tool for improving the credibility and the inclusion of the public sphere. Alongside many characterizations, its main manifestation reflects changes that are occurring at the theoretical conception of empirical reality, about basically how organization, networks, works, functions, and are structured. There are 3 main, according to Van't, that is one of the main scholars worldwide on governance. There are 3 main structures of governance. One is hierarchies, one regards markets, and the third one regards community management. Today, I think in our discussion we'll be like sort of mixing the 3 of them, but we're not gonna enter into details nevertheless. So community-based governance also has a sort of new approach when taking from a bottom-up approach from the communities, and is used as a tool to enhance like local voices and local interests in resolving a number of conflicts, has been used largely on the use and management of natural resources, sustainability, conflict resolutions, etc. When addressing community-based governance in post-conflict scenarios, and we have to always keep in mind that very often we are talking about resource-dependent system, natural resource-dependent economies. And the idea of decentralization, the concept of decentralizations of the function of the states and the services, is very much relevant and is very much central. What happened very often is that we consider two main ideas of decentralization. The first one is very much political, so it's like strengthening economic, democratic institutions, while the second one is much more economic, to create sort of incentives for local economic development. As for the case of post-conflict countries and areas, very often this idea of participation in the sense of decentralization is not understood very much as an instrument to improve the effectiveness of the states, or not even the acceptance of the policy or reforms of the states by the people, but instead is very much seen as an instrument for transforming power relations. And this will be a very important topic when addressing the challenges as well. About natural resource management, very commonly known as NRM, we are addressing here in the past 2 decades a paradigm shift in conservation and natural resources, from a sort of costly state-centered control to approaches that are very much local, so where local people play a much more relevant role. And there are a few elements that are very important in the concept of NRM. First of all is the people-centered approach. So the integration of the conservation and natural resource base and development to sort of overcome conflicts, poverty, hunger, and disease. There is a lot of literature about different aspects of that. Another important element is the role that institutions play. Institutions understood as formal and informal institutions. There's also a lot of literature about that, and the role they have in sort of mediating environment, society, relationship, and conflict at all different scales. Another, nevertheless, notwithstanding these developments, it's also important to see how recent debates and also recent literature are increasingly questioning whether or not decentralization really leads to better provision of services to locals, which also translates in whether or not it translates to better democratization process. Keeping in mind that in post-conflict scenarios, there is all a huge process of reconstruction at different levels, and sometimes also transformation. Therefore, the main question behind this short presentation would be whether or not the theory or the rhetoric really translate into the natural resource management practice. I will do that by addressing, as I said, positive and negative challenges, kind of mixing them together, interfacing both the CBG, the community-based governance, and NRM, the natural resource management. First main challenge, please keep these challenges as like sort of open questions and also food. We know that resource-dependent and socio-economic systems where vulnerable rural communities depend heavily on biodiversity and ecosystem services, and there's a huge link also from a political ecological perspective. There's a cultural link, traditional links with the natural resources of the local communities. Nevertheless, what happens in practice very often is that they lack equitable access to the resources and are very often excluded from decision-making processes, even in post-conflict scenarios. Another important challenge would be how governance of natural resource management strategies build the idea of trust, of building trust between the communities and different stakeholders in the community, fostering like this intersectoral dialogue and increasing better environmental peace building, social justice, and land use justice. In theory, these are all elements that can be found in frameworks created in the literature, also recent literature about the interface between governance and community-based governance in particular, and strategy of natural resource use and management. There's also this element of rhetoric approach of natural resource management that are often used to justify continued central control over valuable resources and natural resources, when it's really about controlling profitable opportunities, often for individuals who are not entitled to them. This relates very much to political economy, in general, to the economic perspective, economic vision, economic trajectory of a state. What happened very often, especially in developing countries and especially in resource-dependent countries, is that we have these extractive economies which are really, really relevant, and so that really affects the interface between community-based governance and natural resource management. In particular, the idea of neo-extractivism, which is a set of growth-oriented development paths and a threat to community-based governance approaches, including those addressing natural resource management. This has been proven to be a sort of contributing to increasing conflict in these instances. There's also an important role played by those applying this management plan of natural resources, this policy in the ground. When these policies has been proven that when these policies become very political in a way, especially in rural contexts, this could be also a contributing of like creating a wider gap between fostering at the same time community-based governance and natural resource management. There's a lot of evidence that indicates how the rhetoric of this and of sort of the devolution of the services, so providing communities to manage and use natural resources, is really much diverged from the practice in real life. And also how persistently the state has continued to direct and sort of dominate natural resource management in general, and sometimes very often delegating this to private companies, very often multinationals. And this we could talk on a different scale completely, but we can add that in the discussion as well. Other challenges when addressing rural context, because we are talking about a rural context where strong economic pressures very often favors the accelerated incorporation of natural resources for the use and also for the global market, so to make it use for the global market, so extracting to exports basically. In this sense, we need to address as a challenges, could be either positive or negative, the idea of improved benefits for local communities, whether or not this really happen, whether or not the government sort of revenues for conservation interests, for development interests really applies to the interest and sort of marries the interests of rural communities. And this could be left as an open question. Also, the idea of trade-off. It's very much proven that very often the trade-off are felt mostly intensively by the poor or by the poorer sector of the communities. This, I would just give you three quick examples. In post-conflict areas of Asia, in particular in the Philippines, there have been studies that have presented how exotic tree species that are destined to agroforestry for the community negatively really affected rural livelihood and cultural beliefs. Also a case from Africa, about South Africa, but also these relate to Namibia, where more cropping areas without proper monitoring and safeguards really translated into increased human-wildlife conflicts. This was given, like, of course, communities were happy to receive more plantation, more space, but at the same time, without proper local governance and on monitoring and safeguards, this really increased human and wildlife conflict. And that was also there's some literature about that. In post-conflict areas of South America, we often see how extractive and anthropic interventions are often established on land for rural subsistence agriculture. As in some cases also parcels of protected areas. This might be also an issue that might be touched upon later in the next presentation. Other challenges is how legitimate resource users, or some resource users that before were not considered legitimate, imagine for example the guerrilla group or some terrorists, so some groups that before were considered sort of previously considered terrorists or criminals, nowadays are sort of seen as legitimate resource users in most sites. This happened very much when donors, NGOs, government services providers, and in some countries also the private sectors sort of support this and backs this up and took more notice of these users and provide assistance, capacity building. We've seen also small enterprise development. Again, in the Philippines, it's a huge case about ecotourism ventures. For example, you have the cases of yerba mate in Paraguay, also many cases of cocoa, for example, in Colombia, and agroforestry system as well. Another challenge that could be seen more as channels for better community-based governance of NRM regards how decentralization itself opened these channels for rural peoples, especially giving a stronger voice to community leaders very often. So there is an increased chances to take part in decision-making processes as a positive challenge, as well as increase political capital. This is more like a sociological perspective. There are many studies that talk about about political capital, for instance, and the representation and the role in decision-making processes. So the transition to forms of autonomy and self-governing, also it could be as a side effect of positive challenges that are happening as well between the interface of CBG and NRM. For example, in some countries, decentralization strategies and plans have addressed issues like equity and reaching the most marginalized. Also, with some like there's a huge project a few years ago in Colombia, run by the United Nations Women, for example, that really addressed this gender element in rural countries, addressing natural resource management as a form of governance as well. Cultural and historical context are also very important in this sort of interface as a positive challenge, mainly related to the degree of access people had to natural resource management before the conflict, during the conflict, beyond the conflict. This is very important when also there are like cultural identity roots there, and it's some elements that have really been important to address in sort of looking at this to CBG and NRM. Also, the idea of ownership of natural resources, the ownership of using, managing, and natural resources. This has been very much central point also in terms of authority, hierarchies, whether it's economic, political, religious, and we've seen also cases of self-governance models, for example, requiring bringing this discourse of self-initiated natural resource management strategies. And yes, and as a conclusion, I would like to point out that although natural resource management plans and policy have often disappointing impacts on local livelihoods, and also the space, the spatial relations of community that enjoys in their own management, community-based governance can really help positioning the local and unique heterogeneity of the post-conflict scenario. This is very important because the idea of community-based governance that can be applied only once in one place, depending on social, economic, and political unique circumstances of each places. Also, one consistent pattern has been like the contrasting expectation of natural resource management between the state officials, so those who really need to implement those plans, and local community that very often lead to conflicting interests. At the same time, the idea that from decentralizations versus centralizations. So the idea that very often central governments are quite absent in rural areas, and so the devolution of function to locals to provide interest also is it's a trade-off that is hard to sort of describe, and very often hard to investigate in that sense. Finally, to give some food for thoughts, also we know that different CBG models of NRM will be needed in different countries. Nevertheless, just to give you some food for thoughts, I would say that just some open idea that we should always start when addressing the interface between community-based governance and natural resource management. We should always start with what resources users know and do, and also the identity rules, the cultural rules, etc. Also promote flexible approaches rather than tightly worded contractual agreements when addressing natural resources, and how to use them and manage them. Create opportunities for pluralistic and inclusive decision making, where we make sure that everybody can be heard. Improve legal literacies. Also, this is very much related to education as a key element to sort of bridge the gap between the communities at the local level and different authorities at different scales. Also improve larger scale popular mobilization over natural resource issues, for example, encouraging the format or the formation of federations, union and association, as long as one communities can have a legal asset behind, then the role played in decision-making process can be much more powerful. Also assure accountability of local organization and assist in conflict management. Monitor policy impacts and peace-building indicators. Create fuller and clearer property rights at the local level. Make livelihood enhancement central to the natural resource management plans and policies. Build local capacity in technical skills. There are two areas which I think are particularly important. One has to do with dealing with local inequalities and the exploitation of social relations, as well as addressing inter-community problems and opportunities. Finally, we should try to shift the focus of the state and NGO intervention to issue of governance and political process, and away from sort of technical and managerial aspects. What is really important is that, for example, technical choices on how should we use and manage natural resources should be really left to the users of natural resources. And with that, I would like to thank you very much for your attention. These are like a list of key references that have, supported this presentation. Thank you very much. And I hand over to the next presenter, I guess.
Yes, thank you, Luca. Thanks for your great presentation, and we are already getting comments and questions for slide sharing, etc. And while Marta is screen sharing, maybe the information just again that we are recording the webinar, and then you can watch it again and also see all screens. And of course, you could also individually address us if there is need. This, we are already seeing the presentation by Marta Vanegas, and I hand over the word to you, Marta. Thank you very much.
Thank you to you, Katarina. Thank you for the introduction. So the work that I present today about sustainable land use systems that targets both climate change mitigation and peace building is done by a multidisciplinary team of researchers at the Alliance Biodiversity CIAT, and is part of the SLUS project, that is an IKI supported project. Okay. So for the outline, first I will talk a little bit about the participatory continuum, then a brief description of the SLUS project, followed by how we are placing the different package of activities that we have carried out so far within the project in this participation continuum. They are basically 4 activity package, prioritization of areas for the study, the selection of promising sustainable land use systems, the prioritization with the communities of these systems, and finishing by the co-design of this process. So first, the participatory continuum. Like we know that for this kind of development projects, the participation of the communities is key if we want to the project to succeed. However, nowadays we see that the word participatory is used for everything. Like you make a small gather of people and you already claim that is a participatory process. However, we want to acknowledge that in our project we have different levels of participation of the communities and different levels of community engagement regarding the different stages of the process of the project, without meaning that this take out any of the validity of the community participation. So the project is the project of sustainable productive strategies, like the acronyms that we use is SLUS, which main objective is to reduce the emissions while at the same time contributing to peace building in Colombia. So for reaching this objective, we have 4 different components that are articulated within them. So a component about policy integration, in which we want really to align with local and national governments about the initiatives that they have regarding reduced emissions and peace building. Then we have a component related to sustainable land systems, where we went to, like, that is more the focus of the presentation today, to really design these systems with the local communities. A third component about value change strategies, in which as well the community is very much engaged as to help us to upgrade these strategies, having as the main focus the social inclusion and the reduction of emissions. And the last component is outreach and promotion, that is basically to how to scale up the adoption of these sustainable land use systems and the value change strategies that have been upgraded. Among the 4 components, we have different levels of participation from the communities. However, today I will talk more about the activities, the package of activities that we have carried out in the first 2 components, as is a working process. So the other 2 components we still are like in the process of developing the activities. So the participatory continuum, we place our activities like as you see in the image. So the priority areas, we think that is more in participation in information giving and participation by consultation. So it's still kind of a more passive participation from the local communities. So what we did first was to make a geographical overlaps analysis, in which we wanted to identify areas of Colombia that could help us to really focus on land-based climate change mitigation and peace building. And so we use some variables for climate change mitigations and other variables related to conflict. And with this scenario that says high, the green one, the one that I'm showing, like we went to talk with with the national government, with the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Agriculture, and the ART to consult with them and to make a validation process to narrow down to 2 departments. Like, so that after this consultation process, the departments selected were Caquetá and Cesar. And once we have done that, we went to a process of consultation and validation, but this time with local governments, local institutions, research institutions, educational institutions, producers associations, in order to really narrow down to the municipality level, and as well to have a first glance, a first overview of the different crop systems that exist in the departments selected. Then, for the selection of the promising SLUs, we as well placing in this participation in information giving and by consultation, in the sense that although it's really like a desk kind of job, the departure point was the last field visits, where with different meetings and the different interviews, we already have in mind which kind of systems could work or were already existing in the regions. So after that, we went to make more like literature review, and we decided cacao in agroforestry was the system that could help us to tackle both, like climate change and peace building. However, by the visits and by the interviews, we saw that this cacao in agroforestry, it already exists in the regions. However, is not well managed. Therefore, like some of the potentialities that it has, are not really are lost. So what we did was make a further review to see a set of practices that will add on in this cacao in agroforestry to try to potentialize all the mitigation potential that have the cacao in agroforestry. Plus, they have some other environmental benefits. After we did this selection of the promising sustainable land uses, we went again to the territories and we worked in the prioritization of these systems. We placed it in a more functional participation and participation for material incentives, in the sense that here you really start to give the voice to the local communities, to hear them out, what they think about the different practices that we already pre-selected. However, we cannot say that this is like an interactive participation, in the sense that we predefine the topics that we were going to discuss during the group meetings. So what we did was two exercises inspired in the participatory rural appraisal. So the first one was the traffic light activity. This activity allowed like a dialogue among the stakeholders of the value chain of the cacao. So we have people like from producers associations, sales companies, but as well we have the support institutions, like for example extensionists, the ministries of the environment, the secretaries of the environment and agriculture. So they could have a dialogue and they could reflect on the different possibilities that we were showing them, thinking about environmental, economic, and social aspects, all of them transversal to peace building. So this allowed them to hear each other, because sometimes in a value chain, like the links are kind of disconnected, or they are just connected by this business link, but no like really thinking what is happening with the link just before me or after me. So it was as well an exercise that allowed them to understand and identify the obstacles and preconditions that need the producers and the producers associations to maybe start to implement a practice that for other links in the chains where the obvious go. After this exercise, we have the prioritization matrix, in which they have first a moment of let's say self-retreat, that they make a critical thinking to reflect on what they have heard, the views of the different stakeholders involved in the previous exercise, to then make a prioritization of these practices according again to environmental, economic, and social factors. This exercise as well allow us as researchers to see if there were some important differences between the different stakeholders of the value chain. And lastly, what we did, or what we were planning to do, was all the co-design process, which is more an interactive participation, in the sense that the communities and the local producers are the ones that have to make the decisions, to make the action plans on how they want to move forward into their land use systems. So this process, it was based on these farmer-to-farmer experiences, in which we will visit several farms that have already implemented some of the practices or all of the practices that we selected. And so the farmers could really have a glance of a peer to see how is to implement these practices, what is the knowledge, what are the experiences, what are the challenges as well of implementing the practices, and of course the benefits of it. After we were going to pass to more the core of the co-design, that it was to have group discussions, so all the farmers interested could reflect upon the visits that they made, share as well the different points of view, and then have a moment for the critical thinking about their own situation. To then make a more individual work, that it was like a standard implementation plan that in fact has much more detail than what I put here. But something that we add on was the knowledge gaps, in the sense that further in the project we wanted as well to create kind of these farmers schools, in which the farmers could have like the information needs, and maybe find some other farmers that already know what they were missing, so that they all could like build these schools, and of course in moments where they will need some outsider advice or expert advice, of course we could come in and help the process. However, although this process was supposed to be done by now, like due to current travel restrictions and gathering restriction, is something that we haven't been able to do yet. So, and now with the situation that is a little bit unstable and we don't know what will happen, we are thinking already how to keep moving this process, but like in a remote way. So we don't know if we will get the same level of participation and engagement of local communities, but we are thinking about to replace this farmer to farmer with more photo voice methodology, in which the producers that already have the practices implemented could take some pictures and tell the story through pictures or little videos. Then to go to the farms that, of course, we cannot make anymore the focus groups discussion, so it will have to be one by one. So to show them the short interviews, could be with video, audio, to take advantage of local radio stations, to maybe promote, usually they have this program that speaks about agriculture, so maybe to ask if we can have some time on these spaces to really focus on cacao and in agroforestry system. And for the implementation plan, like it will not change that much because anyways it's an individual work, but as well for the farmers school, we think that we can take advantage of the local radio station, maybe to have like a fixed program, can be once per month, where we could address the different knowledge gaps that we recollected during the implementation plan. However, as I mentioned, we don't know if with this plan is still a working process. We don't know if we will reach the same level of participation from the communities. However, and as I mentioned before, in the other two components of the project, we have several steps in which the engagement of the communities is as well in this interactive participation continuum. And like we have to just to go ahead, because we cannot stop giving our support to the communities just for the current situation. So like for concluding, that what I wanted to point out at the presentation is that, of course, we know that nowadays it's really difficult to have like the involvement of the communities at all the stages of a research project, even if it's a development project. So it's more to acknowledge that the participation and the project can be valid and say that has participation if you recognize in which level of participation and in which stages of the project you are involving and engaging the communities. So that is what I wanted to share today with you. Thank you very much. And I go back to Katarina.
Thank you, Marta. Thank you for this very interesting presentation, and also to bringing in directly this level of complexity in current times, how to adapt to the current situation with coronavirus. So a great thank you to you, and I'm very happy to hand over my screen to Hector anytime that he is ready to do so. And while Hector puts on his screen, I will also already put a question to Luca's attention. There's the question if you have an example of a successful opportunity for pluralistic and inclusive decision making. So this is a question we can discuss after Hector's presentation, and others, please feel free to also put in your comments and questions. Hector, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
The microphone, it happens to everyone. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you for the opportunity. So I'm going to present about an approach to assess environmental peace building in post-war scenarios, specifically about sustainable land use systems, possible impacts on peace building in the region of Caquetá in Colombia. And yeah, so I think everyone knows that in 2016 there was a peace agreement being signed by the government of Colombia and the FARC guerrilla, the oldest guerrilla, I think, in the world, or at least in the American hemisphere. So it brought about a lot of hope and celebration for many people in Colombia. And in 2017, actually, the guerrillas handed the weapons, and there was a monument being built by these weapons. However, there is an increased number of human rights defenders and environmental activist defenders that have been killed since 2016 and 2019. It depends on who counts it, but it's around 600 leaders that have been killed. So it's not good news for the territorial peace in Colombia. And also the peace agreement in some areas were about more deforestation rates, especially in areas such as Caquetá. So with this in mind, with this context, there is several challenges for the Colombian government and the Colombian people to implement the peace agreement. There have been many projects that arrived to the country to either tackle the problem of social killings or environmental projects that want to stop deforestation or protect biodiversity. However, there are very few that are intertwined, that are addressing these overlapping challenges of protecting the environment whilst contributing to peace building. So I'm going to talk about an example of this program that is trying to tackle both issues within the theory of environmental peace building, and how can you prioritize which dimensions of peace building you should address, and which mechanisms are being put forward to impact on peace building. So I already made the introduction. I will introduce a little bit the case of Caquetá, then how a sustainable land use system design could be taken as an environmental peace building practice. Then I will present my research question and methodology of the first paper of the PhD that I'm carrying out right now. So it is a challenge because I come from the peace building perspective. So I am trying to dig into the environmental projects and agricultural science. So it is also tricky to see the overlapping challenges. However, I used to work in Caquetá, which is a beautiful land. And Caquetá is the perfect example for environmental peace building because it is the gateway of the Amazon region. And it has been affected very harsh by the conflict. The population has one of the highest rates of internally displaced people. It was kind of the headquarters of the FARC guerrilla. And right now, you can see here in the map that the hotspots of deforestation are advancing, coming down from the mountains into what is a protected area, such as this national park, the Serranía de Chiribiquete. So there is different actors with different power symmetries in this region, and there are different drivers of deforestation and conflict right now. But there is also tons of opportunities. So sustainable land use systems. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations defines sustainable land use system as a system that involves the allocation of land to different uses across the landscape in a way that balances economic, social, and environmental values. And there's already some literature that claims that when a peace agreement is being signed, environmental peace building projects that promote new schemes of land planning and management, including natural resource governance, which is the subject of the webinar, it may improve the welfare and resilience of local communities. So the definition that CIAD is using, that Marta also presented, involves pretty much what is being written in the literature. So it promotes balancing sustainable agricultural alternatives for rural livelihoods, while simultaneously promotes stopping deforestation and encouraging peace-building initiatives. So my research question at the beginning was, what are the possible impacts of SLUS, sustainable land use systems, into into peace building or onto peace building. So when you're talking about peace building, it's a really wide concept which has several dimensions. For example, Lederach presents this, and it goes from development, education, to governmental actions, to humanitarian actions, to trauma healing, to structural change, to prevention of further violence. So it's pretty tricky. So it is really good to prioritize when there is a complex situation. So my questions evolved into which dimensions of peace building should be prioritized to assess this kind of systems, and how and through which mechanisms are these dimensions being affected by SLUS. So the methodology that I used was first I did a literature review of over 100 documents into environmental peace building literature, and peace building indicators, monitoring and evaluation approaches, and also conflict sensitivity approaches. And then from this, I derived as a category of concept. Then I made a semi-structured interview to test the dimensions that I picked from the literature. Then I made workshops with the team of ZALF, and we implemented a workshop in Caquetá in the region, but also I conducted some workshops within a conference of global experts, the Environmental Peace Building Conference, and in the launch of the CIAT project, I talked to the practitioners to see what were the theories of change behind. This is some pictures from the workshop in Caquetá, and finally we conducted a survey to national and local experts in Caquetá. So the results, first on the literature on environmental peace building assessment, there have been more and more projects that are trying to recognize the importance of natural resources when designing and implementing post-conflict programming. And there is basically two good tools that are made from practitioners. That is the Environmental Peace Building Manual and the Monitoring and Evaluation tool from Adelphi, which both address first the conflict sensitivity in environmental conservation programs, and the one from Adelphi talks about more how to assess risk of climate fragility and conflict. However, there is a lack of systematic knowledge in monitoring and evaluation missions to prevent risk factors of environmental peace building, like the legitimation of the state, the politicization, deterioration into conflict, displacement, and deterioration of the environment. So even though there are some tools to assess different aspects, there is not a model that embraces really which mechanisms are being used, and also because it's really highly context dependent. So these were the dimensions that I derived from the literature, the dimensions of peace building. So first, socioeconomic inclusion. This concept says that natural resource management programs can grant sustainable access to secure livelihoods for vulnerable populations after war. Then there is a dimension that I named peace culture and conflict management, which is building capacities for addressing conflict in a systematic way. For example, fostering dialogue and negotiation skills. There is also within the literature of peace building transitional justice, which comprehends factors such as trials, truth commissions, compensation to victims, reintegration and reconciliation initiatives. And within the environmental peace building, for example, restoration of ecosystems. Governance, which is quite prominent in the literature, and is basically addresses the way societies make decisions regarding collective problems, thereby creating norms, rules, and institutions, and it ultimately creates social cohesion and trust. And there is security. So the peace building dimension in security is basically what it means doing a security sector reform and making a transition. So the results you will see in this graph that is taken from this paper is the axis X. On the axis X, you can see the 5 dimensions, and then the colors represent the answers of the prioritization exercise. So I present the dimensions to the interviewees, I explain the concepts, and then they were given a priority to which concept they thought that would be impacted the most by SLUS. So you can see here that the practitioners from the SLUS project, they are pretty much clear that the socioeconomic inclusion is the dimension of peace building that they are trying to tackle the most or affect the most, and then governance. And this is basically an agreement between all the stakeholders. However, the local experts in Caquetá, which involve also farmers and indigenous communities, they privilege peace culture and conflict management and socioeconomic inclusion, so over governance. And this is pretty interesting because it says that there are mechanisms for governance. However, they feel that in order to deal with conflict, they need these capacities of negotiation and of conflict management. So then I asked not only to prioritize these dimensions, but what they thought were the mechanisms that were using these dimensions. So in this table, you can see the stakeholder type on the left, and above I clustered the most common response for this mechanism. So in generating livelihoods and income, both national and practitioners, national experts and practitioners, they were making an emphasis on detaching the communities from illegal economies or cutting the dependencies from illicit activities. And the global experts brought the attention into inclusive and equal distribution of natural resources. While in Caquetá, the local experts, they were already giving some ideas, and they say that, for example, building peasant markets bring the people together. Also, trust was one explanatory mechanism, building trust, and land use planning. This is very interesting because the global experts that handle or manage the theory and the experts at the field, they say that this would increase land use planning, which is pretty much needed. Also, as a complementary answer, governance mechanisms can increase the coordination between institutional stakeholders that is very much needed in Colombia, and also increases citizen participation. And with regards to participation, it creates an opportunity for common agendas, and the agenda in the territory is to protect their territory, so from actors. And the SLUS practitioner says that this also enables the participation of the stakeholders in their ownership of production mechanisms, of deciding which production mechanism is there. So other mechanisms that were explained, something very interesting from a professor from the Javeriana was that this could help to understand the socio-ecological uses of land. For example, if a community was affected by the conflict, they had certain ways to manage their land, and when the conflict happens, it breaks these links to the nature. So this could also be increased in a post-conflict scenario, or to rebuild. And the local experts complement this, saying that this also could help to improve ecological planning. The global expert didn't mention in this case that this would impact on building capacities or generating knowledge or fostering food security, which is interesting because the national and the local experts claim that it's really important to understand the practice of the communities and to recognize the ancestral knowledge that is already there. And finally, another mechanism is the importance of having a human-centered approach, human security approach. And the people in Caquetá also named that the importance of an agrarian reform, which is also part of the, in part of the first point of the peace agreement in Colombia, the rural integral reform. So as Conclusions. First, the agreement within all the stakeholders is that socioeconomic inclusion is one of the dimensions of peace building that can be used to assess the impact of SLAS, right? So the explanatory mechanism is because it is diverse, inclusive. Creating diverse and inclusive livelihoods increases resilience for vulnerable populations against illegal economies. The second prioritized dimension was governance, except for the local experts. And the explanatory mechanism is because an exercise of co-designing and co-implementing projects is a process that facilitates the creation of cooperative networks involving many stakeholders, and this could ultimately, in the long run, resolve land uses and build trust, like if you build a vision of development. One recommendation is to embrace the capacity building and conflict transformation within the project activities, because yes, you can implement an environmental conservation project, and you can have a good analysis of the context, but the implementation of environmental projects per se do not provide dialogue. It doesn't emerge just because. It needs a process of design. It needs a process of creating the whole environment and the whole context to bring two actors that are fighting or that are contended together in order to grant cooperativism or cooperation mechanism. So this is important to include in the program, at the initial stages of these kind of programs that are trying to bring together these two words: environmental protection or environmental conservation and peace building development. And yeah, this is pretty much it.
Thank you, Hector. Thanks very much for your presentation, and also, of course, to Luca and Marta for their presentations. And time has flown, so we have already reached the time limit, but of course, we want to use some more time, and we are lucky to have a bit more time, if you all agree and stay on, to take some of the questions that we find in the question and chat system. And I would kindly invite all speakers to also put on your cameras again so we can actually see you, and I'm also asked to share my screen so you can see my beautiful slide. And I would ask Luca directly actually to dive into the question I already raised earlier. Luca, do you have an example of a successful opportunity for pluralistic and inclusive decision making?
Yes, thank you very much for these questions. I think we need more examples, especially in literature. We need to address more positive cases and successful cases. I do have an examples that I've been witnessing and also describing throughout my PhD in Paraguay, in the context of one of the largest wetlands on Earth, the Pantanal, between Bolivia, Paraguay, and Brazil. In a district that is populated mostly by one indigenous community, and it's called the Ishiro community. So they had like some disputation of land and some conflicts over land and their territorial ancestral lands bordering the wetlands, so the river, therefore affecting their fishing and ancestral fishing activities. What they've been able to do as a model for community-based governance in the management of these fisheries and in this, in the fishing, so sustainable fishing somehow, so natural resources is water, to create a lobby for a policy at the local level that was able to sort of co-direct and co-manage with some private landowners that had taken the land of the indigenous people, or part of the land of the indigenous people, to jointly manage, so overcoming a sort of conflicts within the application of a very specific local law on the ground in the field. And this was done by taking some organizing a union out of the indigenous community. So the group of the indigenous community, the leaders, they created a union, so a legal form. They lobbied nationally and then regionally and they managed to create a policy for sustainable fishing, so co-fishing together with private actors. And this idea was mostly based on one indigenous concept that is called the irmo in the indigenous language of the Ishiro, which is the nexus between the human behavior and the availability of animals. This idea transcends a bit the image itself. Is more about the equal redistributions and use, sustainable use of the fishing, for example, in this case, of the gathering the food and hunting in this case, and that was used successfully somehow. I mean, it took over 10 years, but eventually there are some successful cases, not sufficiently investigated from a scientific point of view, but there are some NGOs, local NGOs and regional NGOs that have been working very much on these cases. Also, it's a 3-border area, so it's quite interesting. Hope I have answered your question.
Thank you, Luca. Thanks very much. There is another 2 questions I will put, and I think Marta could maybe make a start to respond, and then Hector can maybe take up, and then we see if we can also take another more complex question that is also there with a lot of text. But the second question is SLUS working at the farmer community level only, or also at the nexus with local, regional, national governance? This is the first question to better understand sustainable land use systems approach. And the other question is, what about the land distribution of the property in Caquetá? How does it influence peace building projects? Marta, maybe you can start, and then Hector can maybe chip in, and please keep it brief. I'm sorry to have to say that.
It's okay. So in the project, what we want is to really try to have some producers to implement the practices that we selected and that we prioritize with them and with the all value chain stakeholders. However, as I mentioned before, we are always really working hand by hand with local and national governments, because our idea is as well that the results that we get at the end of the project can be really articulated with these national and local initiatives that are taking place in Colombia to reach the reduction of the emissions and as well the peace building. I'm sorry, I seem to not be able to share my camera. I don't know why, but sorry.
Okay. We are happy it worked earlier, so we've all seen your face at least once for a very short time. Hector, you want to add something to it, maybe on the land distribution and its influence on peace building projects? Now it's working, Mark.
Sure. Yeah, this is a really good question, and it has everything to do with land distribution, not only in Caquetá, but in Colombia. And this is basically, it's for several reasons, but to keep it short, the intersection between climate change and peace building in Colombia is all about land. And it is about land because the process of colonization in Colombia, especially in Caquetá, was even promoted by the government for peasants that didn't have any access to land to get into the forest, cut the trees, clean it. They call it clean it in this sense, and then they will give titles. So there was a lot of land available, but not it was not exploited, so to say. So right now the actors that have lots of land are the ones promoting certain patterns of violence, and these peasants were already displaced by previous conflicts. So land access is a really integral part of the peace agreement in the first point. It was one of the claims of the guerrillas at the first place when they had this political approach. So land distribution also would decrease the deforestation rates and decrease other bad practices of land use in Colombia.
Thank you, Hector. I think we have to close to give everyone a quick opportunity to breathe, but I would like to read out maybe another question that is there, but also with a link, so maybe discussion can go on in the next online seminar following, or also separately, which says that peace building rarely gives the right relevance to climate security, so that the importance of the potential impact of climate variability or change on peace and security. And even though this causal link might not be tested, the role of climate in exacerbating existing threats, also relating to natural resource management, needs to be further researched. Is there any impulse reaction on this complex question on how it relates to climate security? And everyone, there's also a link where you could also find more information on current research going on in that regard. Hector has left us.
Sorry.
Hector, Luca, Marta, on the climate security and how that relates.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you well. Could you please write it maybe on the chat or?
Yeah, it's in the chat system. But maybe Marta, do you have a response to this at this?
I cannot see the question, and I would like also to read it because it's quite long. And
yeah,
to make sure I understood.
The question is how also climate security and the role of climate in exacerbating existing threats, that also relate to natural resource management. And if you have any thoughts on this nexus of climate security and natural resource management and peace building processes.
Yeah, like for sure, I think like the conflict around natural resources, and when there is lack and unsustainable use of natural resources create more conflict, which of course doesn't help to peace building. And that is why from the SLUS project, we as well are trying to target this climate change mitigation using this SLUS, because we believe that there is a clear nexus between what can happen, and we know that in Colombia, or what they have said is that we are like in a country where where the I got concentrated.
Yeah.
Where the climate change will have a big impact in the natural resources. So of course it could exacerbate the conflict.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Marta.
I can also say
Hector,
something
one
about
more
it.
sentence. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yes, I agree that it needs more research. The thing is that climate change changes the scenario, changes the context for peace building. If you're only talking about peace building operations or peacekeeping operations, so it exacerbates vulnerabilities of the communities, climate change. And there is already some research that is done in Africa where a possible link between climate change and conflict is when the food prices are being reduced, or the food security is being reduced in some areas. So that's where the conflict can start. So it is true that it needs to be more research, and it needs to be more taken into account within projects that are only talking about peace building, like the regular activities, like governance institutions, etc. So it's something that needs to be taken into account for sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then thank you very much, and thanks to all of you as presenters for your presentations and also for your responses to the question. Thanks to all of you who have joined and you've stayed on and bared our time management. And with this, I would say goodbye to Luca and to Marta, and of course to Hector for now. and we will change the slides, and in a few minutes, let's say another 2 or 3 minutes break, we will then continue with our next online seminar. So thanks very much, and all who are interested, just stay on and we will continue in a very few minutes. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Katarina. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.